All right, so get ready because today we're diving deep into some pretty intense stuff. Um, Fear, desire, suffering, and the wild idea that it could all just end.
Yeah,
And our guide for this exploration is a 1975 talk by J.Krishnamurti,
right.
a philosopher who really pushes us to look inward,
Mm-hmm.
way inward.
Yeah.
We're not looking for easy answers or just passive listening here.
Nope.
Krishnamurti wants us to actively engage,
Right.
question everything we think we know,
That's a good idea.
and most importantly, observe ourselves, like all our messy thoughts and feelings without judgment.
Yeah, but I find really fascinating about Krishnamurti is that he questions the very foundation on which we try to solve these problems.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the energy we use to approach them.
Right.
He argues that the energy of thought,
Mm-hmm.
the kind that's always striving,
Yeah.
grasping, wanting more, and creating conflict,
Right.
well, it hasn't exactly led us to a peaceful and fulfilling existence, has it?
Yeah, it really does feel like we're stuck in this loop of wanting, striving, and never quite feeling satisfied. So what's the alternative?
Right.
What's this other kind of energy Krishnamurti's talking about?
He calls it non-mechanistic energy.
Okay.
Think of it this way.
Yeah.
Mechanistic energy is like a car engine, all pistons and combustion, fueled by friction
Mm-hmm.
and needing constant input to keep going.
Okay.
Non-mechanistic energy is more like the flow of a river,
Okay.
natural, effortless,
Yeah.
and powerful in its own way.
Okay.
But to even begin to tack into that,
Mm-hmm.
he says we have to understand the nature of desire.
Okay.
And he breaks desire down into three components.
Okay.
The simple wanting of something,
Mm-hmm.
the longing for it,
Yeah.
and the fascinating question of how that desire even arises in the first place.
So it's not just about wanting a new phone or that
Uh-oh.
promotion at work.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the deeper longing that drives those desires.
Exactly.
Okay.
Krishnamurti suggests that at the root of desire lies this feeling of lack,
Mm-hmm.
this sense that something is missing. We're constantly trying to fill that void,
Right.
whether it's with material possessions,
Yeah.
achievements, relationships,
Hmm.
or even spiritual pursuits.
Right.
And he's not advocating for denying desire altogether like some traditions might.
Right.
He's calling for a deep understanding of it.
Okay.
Why are we constantly seeking fulfillment outside ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Is this sense of lack inherent to our nature?
Right.
Or is it something conditioned by society,
Yeah.
our upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
the way we've been taught to see the world?
Oh, okay. So how does this all connect back to the energy we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
How do we move from that car engine energy to the flow of the river?
Krishnamurti would say that our usual way of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
the one fueled by that mechanistic energy,
Right.
actually traps us in cycles of fear and desire.
Okay.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
He says the root of fear is time,
Okay.
not just chronological time,
Mm-hmm.
like waiting for an appointment or the seasons changing,
Yeah.
but also psychological time.
Okay. I think I need a little help with this one.
Right.
What exactly is psychological time?
Yeah.
It sounds a bit like science fiction.
Think about it this way.
Yeah.
How often are you replaying past mistakes in your head,
Mm-hmm.
feeling that same regret or shame all over again, or worrying about things that haven't even happened,
Yeah.
stressing about potential future problems?
Mm-hmm.
That's psychological time,
Okay.
clinging to the past and projecting into the future.
Right.
And Krishnamurti suggests it might not even be real.
Whoa.
What if it's just a construct of our minds?
Right.
A story we tell ourselves that keeps us trapped in fear and anxiety.
So if I'm understanding this correctly,
Yeah.
he's saying that our constant worrying about the future or regretting the past
Right.
is actually what's causing us to feel fear, not the events themselves.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
We hold on to memories of pain and fear,
Right.
and then we project those experiences into the future, worrying that they'll happen again.
Yeah.
Or, on the flip side,
Mm-hmm.
we remember pleasurable experiences
Right.
and become terrified of losing them.
Yeah.
Either way, we're not truly present in the now.
Mm-hmm.
We're caught in this mental time warp of our own making.
Yeah. That's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how much of our fear is actually based on something real and how much is just imagined.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
Krishnamurti goes even further,
Okay.
questioning whether psychological time is real at all,
Mm-hmm.
or if it's just a construction of our minds.
Right.
If it's just a construct,
Yeah.
then maybe fear, which he says is rooted in time, is also an illusion.
Okay, but how do we actually deal with fear in our daily lives?
Right.
We can't just snap our fingers and stop worrying about things, right?
Yeah.
Krishnamurti also talks about how fear is cultivated in us
It does.
by society,
Mm.
education, even religion, right?
He does. He points out the role of authority in generating fear.
Okay.
The authority of religious figures,
Mhm.
political leaders, even experts in various fields.
Right.
We're taught to look outside ourselves for answers,
Mm-hmm.
for security,
Yeah.
for someone to tell us what to do and how to think,
Right.
which creates a sense of dependence and ultimately fear.
Mm-hmm.
He's not saying we should reject all forms of guidance,
Right.
but rather we should critically examine where our fears are coming from
Yeah.
and whether they're actually serving us.
So it's about taking responsibility for our own fears,
Exactly.
understanding where they're coming from,
Right.
and not just blindly accepting them as truth.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And when it comes to dealing with fear,
Yeah.
Krishnamurti is pretty skeptical of traditional approaches,
Okay.
especially psychoanalysis.
Right.
He argues that analyzing the unconscious, trying to dissect and understand our fears,
Yeah.
is actually based on a false division.
What does he mean by a false division?
Yeah.
I'm a little lost here.
He says the very act of analyzing creates a separation between the analyzer and the analyzed.
Oh, okay.
It's like setting up two parts of yourself.
Yeah.
One that's trying to figure things out,
Right.
and another that's being examined.
Mm.
But in reality, that analyzer,
Yeah.
that part of us that's trying to solve the mystery of our fear,
Right.
is just another fragment of thought,
Mm-hmm.
just another part of the very thing we're trying to understand.
So we're stuck in this endless loop
Yeah.
of trying to analyze our fear
Right.
with the very tool, our thinking mind,
Mm-hmm.
that might be creating the fear in the first place.
Exactly.
It's like trying to untangle a knot by pulling on both ends at the same time.
Exactly. And Krishnamurti suggests a different approach altogether.
Okay.
Observation without judgment.
Okay.
He says true observation requires letting go of the me,
Mm-hmm.
that sense of self with all its preconceived notions, beliefs, and judgments.
Right.
It's like stepping back from the constant chatter in our minds
Mm-hmm.
and just seeing things as they are,
Yeah.
without the filter of our fears, desires, or opinions.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It is challenging.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
It's like asking me to jump out of my own skin and look back at myself.
Right.
How is that even possible?
But Krishnamurti gives some powerful examples
Okay.
of how this can work with fear.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're afraid of losing your job.
Okay.
Instead of getting swept away by all those anxious what-ifs and catastrophic scenarios,
Right.
you simply observe the fear itself.
Okay.
You notice the tightness in your chest, the racing thoughts,
Yeah.
the urge to frantically update your resume or call your contacts,
Right.
but you don't identify with it.
Okay.
You're not becoming the fear.
Mm-hmm.
You're simply acknowledging its presence in your experience,
Okay.
like a cloud passing through the sky.
So you're not trying to push the fear away or pretend it's not there.
Right.
And you're not trying to analyze it to death either.
Exactly.
You're just creating space for it, allowing it to be there without letting it take over.
That's a great way to put it. And Krishnamurti suggests that when we do this,
Yeah.
when we observe fear without the interference of all those me thoughts and judgments, the fear itself can begin to dissolve.
Okay.
It's like shining a light on a monster in the closet.
Right.
Once you see it clearly, it loses its power over you.
Yeah, this is really making me think about all those times I've spiraled into anxiety or fear.
Yeah.
What if I could have just observed those feelings instead of getting caught up in them?
Right.
It's a very different way of looking at things.
It is. And this principle of observation, he says, applies not just to fear,
Okay.
but to other key elements of human experience as well.
Yeah.
Like pleasure and suffering.
Okay.
But we're running out of time for this segment.
All right, well, let's pick up right where we left off next time
Okay.
and dive into those topics.
Sounds good.
Pleasure, suffering, and the big question of whether suffering can actually end.
Right.
This has already been such a thought-provoking conversation. Okay, so last time we were starting to unpack Krishnamurti's ideas about fear and desire and this concept of psychological time.
Right.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, but I'm really curious to dive deeper into this idea of observation without judgment.
Okay.
How does that actually play out when it comes to something like pleasure?
Well, Krishnamurti makes a really interesting distinction between pleasure and joy.
Okay.
He sees pleasure as something that's cultivated, something we seek out and try to hold on to,
Mm-hmm.
whereas joy is more spontaneous,
Yeah.
fleeting, arising naturally in the moment.
So is he saying that pleasure is bad?
No.
I mean, who doesn't enjoy a good meal
Right.
or a beautiful sunset?
He's not saying pleasure is inherently bad,
Okay.
but he points out that the pursuit of pleasure often leads to fear.
Okay.
When we become attached to pleasurable experiences
Mm-hmm.
and afraid of losing them,
Right.
those experiences start to control us.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt anxious about a vacation ending?
Oh, absolutely.
Or worried about your favorite band breaking up?
Yeah, it's like the anticipation and the memory of the experience become more important than the experience itself.
Right.
And then there's that fear of it never happening again
Exactly.
or not being as good the next time.
Exactly. And that's where suffering comes in.
Okay.
Krishnamurti suggests that enjoyment,
Yeah.
that pure in-the-moment experience,
Hmm.
is actually quite different from pleasure.
Okay.
Enjoyment happens spontaneously
Mm-hmm.
without any striving or grasping.
Right.
But when we register that enjoyment as memory,
Okay.
when we start chasing after it, trying to recreate it,
Yeah.
it turns into the pursuit of pleasure.
Okay.
And that pursuit, he says, is a recipe for suffering.
So even something as seemingly positive as pleasure can become a source of suffering if we're not careful. It makes you wonder if anything is truly safe from the potential for suffering.
Right.
Which brings us to that big question we touched on earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Can suffering end totally?
Yeah.
Is that even possible?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that Krishnamurti doesn't offer any easy answers or quick fixes.
Right.
He's not selling a feel-good, pain-free philosophy.
Okay.
In fact, he acknowledges the pervasiveness of suffering.
Yeah.
It's all around us, both on an individual and collective level.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about how humanity has tried to deal with suffering throughout history,
Right.
through religion wars, entertainment, you name it.
Yeah.
But the suffering persists.
So if all these attempts to escape or avoid suffering haven't worked,
Right.
what does he suggest we do?
Yeah.
Just sit there and take it.
That's where Krishnamurti's approach gets really radical.
Okay.
He suggests that the key to ending suffering lies not in escaping it or fighting it,
Mm-hmm.
but in understanding it.
Okay.
And he doesn't mean understanding it intellectually,
Right.
like reading a book about suffering or dissecting its causes.
Yeah.
He's talking about a deeper experiential understanding. That comes from directly observing our own suffering without judgment.
But isn't that just going to make the suffering worse?
Well,
I mean, if I just sit there and focus on how much something hurts, isn't that just going to amplify the pain?
that's a common misconception.
Okay.
But Krishnamurti would say that it's actually our resistance to suffering,
Mm-hmm.
our attempts to push it away or explain it away, that actually perpetuates it.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah.
When we experience physical pain,
Right.
our instinct is often to tense up,
Yeah.
to resist it.
Mm-hmm.
But that tension actually makes the pain feel worse.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that with physical pain. If I can relax into it,
Yeah.
it somehow becomes more bearable.
Right.
Is he saying it's the same with emotional pain?
That's exactly what he's suggesting.
Okay.
He's saying that our mental and emotional reactions to suffering,
Mm-hmm.
the stories we tell ourselves about why we're suffering,
Yeah.
the judgments we make about ourselves or others,
Right.
the desperate attempts to escape the pain,
Yeah.
all of that
Mm.
actually creates a kind of secondary suffering on top of the original pain.
So it's like we're not only experiencing the pain itself,
Right.
but we're also adding another layer of suffering
Exactly.
through our own thoughts and reactions.
Yeah,
That actually makes a lot of sense.
it does.
But how do we actually put this into practice?
Okay.
Can you give me a concrete example of how we can observe suffering without judgment?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's take the example of jealousy,
Okay.
which Krishnamurti mentions specifically in this talk.
Hmm.
Imagine you're feeling jealous because your friend just got a promotion you were hoping for.
Okay.
Instead of getting caught up in that whole,
Yeah.
it's not fair,
Yeah.
I deserve that more story,
Mm-hmm.
you simply observe the feeling of jealousy itself.
Okay.
Notice the tightness in your chest,
Mm-hmm.
the churning in your stomach,
Right.
the thoughts swirling in your mind,
Yeah.
maybe even the urge to gossip or put your friend down.
So you're not denying the feeling or pretending it's not there. You're just acknowledging it, paying attention to how it feels in your body and mind
Mm-hmm.
without adding all that extra judgment and drama.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as you do this, you might notice that the jealousy itself begins to shift.
Good.
It might lose some of its intensity.
Right.
You might start to see the situation more clearly
Yeah.
without the distortion of your own ego.
Okay.
It's like creating space around the suffering,
Mm-hmm.
so it doesn't feel so all-consuming.
And maybe in that space, something else can emerge.
Right.
Something more positive, maybe even compassion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking back to what we were talking about earlier with fear
Yeah,
and how Krishnamurti suggests that by observing fear without judgment, it can actually dissolve.
right.
Is he saying the same thing about suffering?
Yeah,
That by simply observing it, we can somehow transcend it?
that's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think it gets to the heart of Krishnamurti's teachings.
Okay.
He's not suggesting that we can simply will ourselves out of suffering, or that there's some magic formula for becoming a perpetually blissful being.
Okay.
He's pointing to a more profound transformation,
Mm-hmm.
a shift in consciousness
Yeah.
that arises from a deep understanding of the nature of suffering itself.
So it's not about achieving some kind of perfect state of non-suffering.
Right.
It's about learning to relate to suffering in a different way,
Yeah,
a way that doesn't create more suffering on top of what we're already experiencing.
that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And he emphasizes that this isn't about becoming some kind of spiritual Superman
Right.
or achieving some kind of special state.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that this potential for transformation is inherent in all of us.
Mm-hmm.
We all have the capacity to observe our own experience with clarity
Right.
and to respond to suffering with compassion,
Yeah.
both for ourselves and for others.
Okay, so I'm getting that this observation thing is key.
Yeah.
But I'm still a little unclear on how compassion fits into all of this. Didn't Krishnamurti say that true compassion can't exist without first understanding and transcending our own suffering?
Yes, he did.
Oh,
And I think this is where it gets really interesting.
okay.
He's not talking about the kind of pity or sympathy that comes from feeling superior to someone else's suffering.
Right.
He's talking about a deeper understanding that arises from recognizing our shared humanity,
Okay.
our interconnectedness in the face of suffering.
So it's not about trying to fix other people's problems or feeling sorry for them.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together,
Exactly.
that we all experience pain and loss and disappointment,
Mm.
and that those experiences actually connect us rather than separate us.
Exactly. And when that recognition becomes a lived reality,
Okay.
when we see ourselves reflected in the eyes of every other being,
Mm-hmm.
then compassion flows naturally and effortlessly
Yeah.
without any sense of effort or separation.
This is starting to click for me.
Good.
It's like Krishnamurti is saying that the path to ending suffering,
Yeah.
both for ourselves and for the world, begins with this radical act of observation, turning towards our own pain, fear, and confusion
Right.
with a gentle and curious awareness
Yeah,
without judgment or resistance.
exactly.
And from that place of understanding, compassion can arise, not as a forced emotion,
Right.
but as a natural expression of our shared humanity.
That's a beautiful way to sum it up. And I
Yeah.
think it highlights the truly revolutionary nature of Krishnamurti's teachings.
Yeah.
He's not offering us a set of beliefs or rituals to follow.
Right.
He's inviting us to undertake a deep and ongoing exploration of ourselves,
Okay.
to question our assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
and to discover the possibility of a fundamentally different way of being in the world.
Right.
A way that's grounded in awareness, compassion, and a deep understanding of our interconnectedness.
So it's not about achieving some kind of perfect state of enlightenment or becoming a saint.
Yeah.
It's about taking small steps,
Yeah.
moment by moment,
Exactly.
to cultivate awareness and and a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And I think that's a good place to pause for now.
Yeah.
Next time, we'll explore this idea of non-mechanistic energy a bit further
Yeah.
and see how it all ties together with Krishnamurti's vision of a world free from suffering.
So last time we were talking about this radical idea that by simply observing our suffering without judgment, we can actually create the conditions for it to end, and that from that space of understanding, genuine compassion can arise.
Right. It's like Krishnamurti is suggesting that we have this incredible power within us, the power to transform our experience of suffering by changing how we relate to it.
Yeah, it's a pretty mind-blowing concept, but it also raises a lot of questions for me. Like, if suffering is something we can transcend, does that mean we're supposed to just ignore the suffering in the world around us?
That's a great question, and it's one that Krishnamurti addresses directly in this talk. He's very clear that ending suffering isn't about becoming indifferent to the pain of others. In fact, he suggests that it's only by understanding and transcending our own suffering that we can truly be compassionate towards others.
So it's not about turning a blind eye to the world's problems or pretending that everything is fine and dandy. It's about recognizing that suffering is part of the human experience, and that by learning to meet our own suffering with awareness and compassion, we can develop a deeper empathy for the suffering of others.
Exactly. It's like he's saying that compassion isn't something we can just force ourselves to feel. It arises naturally from a deep understanding of our shared humanity, from the recognition that we're all interconnected and that we all share this capacity for both joy and sorrow.
Yeah, this reminds me of something we talked about earlier, the idea that Krishnamurti challenges the very energy we use to approach these problems. He suggests that the energy of thought, the kind that's fueled by conflict striving and the constant pursuit of more, is actually what keeps us trapped in cycles of fear and desire.
Yes, and he points toward a different kind of energy, an energy that's not based on friction or opposition, but on something deeper, something more harmonious and life-affirming.
So, how do we tap into that other kind of energy? Is it something we can cultivate through meditation or yoga, or is it more about a fundamental shift in our perspective?
I think it's a bit of both. Krishnamurti doesn't offer a step-by-step guide or a specific technique for accessing this non-mechanistic energy. But he does suggest that it arises naturally when we let go of our attachment, when we stop trying to control everything and everyone around us, and when we allow ourselves to simply be present in the moment.
It's like he's saying that this other kind of energy is already within us. It's not something we have to go out and find or create. It's just a matter of clearing away the mental and emotional clutter that's blocking it.
That's a great way to put it, and I think it highlights the paradox at the heart of Krishnamurti's teachings. He's inviting us to let go of all the things we think we need to be happy and fulfilled all the material possessions, achievements, and relationships, and to discover that true happiness and fulfillment are already present within us.
Yeah, it's like the old saying, the kingdom of God is within you. But instead of a religious context, Krishnamurti is grounding it in a deep understanding of human consciousness.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes his teaching so timeless and relevant. He's speaking to something universal, the human longing for freedom, happiness, and a sense of meaning and purpose.
This has been such a rich and thought-provoking conversation. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of Krishnamurti's ideas.
I agree, but I think we've covered some really important ground today. We've explored the nature of fear, desire, and suffering. We've delved into the concept of psychological time and the idea of observation without judgment, and we've touched on the possibility of accessing a different kind of energy, one that's not based on conflict and struggle, but on harmony and interconnectedness.
And maybe that's the most important takeaway from this deep dive. It's not about finding all the answers. It's about opening ourselves up to new possibilities, to a different way of experiencing life, and to the transformative power of awareness and compassion.
Beautifully said, and I think Krishnamurti would remind us that this isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's an invitation to live our lives differently, to pay attention to our thoughts, feelings, and actions, and to see how they contribute to or detract from our own suffering and the suffering of others.
So if you're feeling inspired to explore these ideas further, we highly recommend checking out more of J. Krishnamurti's work. There are countless books, talks, and videos available online, and we'll include some links in the show notes to get you started.
And remember, this isn't about becoming a Krishnamurti scholar or memorizing his teachings. It's about taking his insights and applying them to your own life, seeing how they resonate with your own experience.
As always, we encourage you to share your thoughts and reflections in the comments. What stood out to you from this deep dive? What questions are you still pondering? We'd love to hear from you.
Because ultimately, the journey of understanding is a shared one. We're all in this together, and we can learn so much from each other.
And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought-provoking question from Krishnamurti. If you were to observe your own suffering without the interference of thought, without the me adding its own commentary and judgments, what would you discover?
Take some time to sit with that question, explore it with an open mind and a curious heart, and see what unfolds.
Until next time, keep diving deep.